Ladies and gentlemen, Deb Socia from Next Century, the founder of Next Century Cities. Tell me if I'm wrong.
A little bit, but
A little
thanks.
bit.
That was really nice to say I'm the founder, but actually it was founded by a group of mayors who said, we really need to figure this out. We need some help to figure it out. We should work collaboratively because only when we work together do we get stuff done. And so I'm very lucky to be sitting up here with these amazing people who have done such incredible work in this space. If by chance you know of a city that you think might be interested, we're really dedicated to helping cities figure out how to get fast, affordable, reliable access and how to work together to impact the national conversation. So I'd love to be helpful if I could in that way. So I thank you all. It's wonderful to have you all here. And I'm going to start with you, Chris, okay? I'm going to ask a few questions. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to ask the audience to join in and ask some questions. You might want to be thinking about what you'll ask, okay? So I wanted to ask, you've talked about the build to demand approach. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. Well, it's the idea that you have neighborhoods that basically qualify if they hit a certain level of interest. It's something that I think Google is not the first to do, but raised up. And it's something that, in fact, we see local governments doing, and something that we may even advise. I'm the policy director with Next Century Cities, and 75 members already. Some of them are very interested in that approach. I think it's worth noting that this is a superior approach to the AT&T, Uverse, and the Fios deployment pattern of we decide, you deal, and of not giving an option. At least with build to demand, neighborhoods have an option of building. But my concern is the neighborhoods that don't qualify, if they come back or not. And I'm less concerned when local governments do it because they have a requirement to meet everyone's needs ultimately, democratically.
Thank you. So Jim, you talked about the 2 cities that petitioned the FCC. There are still 18 other states that are problematic. If there's a city in one of those states considering writing a petition, what due diligence should they do to prepare?
Okay. Can I do one thing before I answer your question?
Absolutely.
I'd like to take an opportunity to address a question that Milo asked me before this session. It has nothing to do with community broadband directly, but I think that you probably were wondering about the same thing. Milo asked me, how was it that 43 local governments filed a letter with the FCC? 42? Okay, that's correct. 42 filed a letter with the FCC asking to be exempted from the net neutrality order. Now, our clients, our public clients, are just all over the issue. Every possible interpretation of what's going to be in the order is some subset of our clients are on that position, so we have not been able to take a position publicly on it. But my answer to Milo was to recall the words of Alan Richardson, the former executive director of the American Public Power Association, which represents the nation's 2,000 public power utilities. He said that getting and holding consensus among APPA's members is like walking down the street with a wheelbarrow full of frogs. So that's my answer to Milo and to the rest of you on this. Now, Deb, in answer to your question, what should a municipality that believes it is impeded by state law and is considering a preemption petition, what should it do? It should very carefully read its law, and all of the laws in the states are different from one another. They have different language, different nuances, so they need to understand extremely well what their law says, what they would like to achieve, and how the law stands in the way of their achieving what they can achieve. Even so, working with these laws over the last 15 years or so has taught us a great deal about them. And one thing that I would immediately offer is that we would be glad to talk to them about those laws without charge, at least at the beginning, to make sure, well, yeah. Well, or not necessarily just the first one, but we want to make sure that the petitions are most effective. We don't want petitions filed that are rejected or that are that create bad law. So we're in this together, and we are glad to help guide or just give feedback if wanted, and that's my answer.
Thanks, and I will say that everybody sitting up here has been extraordinarily generous with your time, supporting the cities that I work with, and I appreciate that. So Hannah, let me ask you a question. This one is a bit selfish. I get emails every single day from citizens who say, my God, my service is horrible, it's intermittent, it's very expensive. What can I as a citizen do to make change?
Thanks, Deb. I think that's a great question. I also receive these emails, potentially from the same people. We should take a peek. We should look at our address books. But I think that, is this one still working? Okay. I think it's important for people to understand that the local relationships that you have with your local legislators who might not actually be steeped in this policy, who can look beyond the different ways that this service is provisioned and can just see the person in front of them and can hear the story about why they need the right to communicate, why they need access to affordable, reliable, neutral, universal broadband service is huge, because it creates the opportunity for later for there to be more legislators who unite, who can work with groups like Joanne's, like Jim's, like yours, to create that argument. Movement building is something that takes a long time, but it's built, as many of the people in this room understand, it's built on the power of individual stories and the fearlessness to demand what we actually deserve. And so we're challenging the franchise in Philadelphia. I completely understand how much of a David versus Goliath fight that is. And I don't think we're going to win everything. One of our demands is that Comcast pay for every science, technology, education, and math teacher in the Philadelphia public schools, as well as every piece of connectivity and hardware above and beyond the E-rate program. And you know what? That is exactly what they should pay for. And they're not going to do that. But by asking for what we deserve, creating a movement that's united around it, organizing on the local basis with groups that have never been active in telecom policy before, we create the opportunity for even in the cities most captured by the industry to actually win some change. And I believe that for my children and for all of our children here, we're going to have something very different, like in the call to action you were making, Jim, right at the end of your talk. So that's what I would say.
And I would say it helps to have a Hannah on your side. So,
I'm banned from Comcast, so I will not go to that side. And the NAB.
So Joanne, one of the other questions I get frequently from cities is about funding. That seems to be one of the first questions I get from a city that's saying, we have terrible access, no one wants to bring access to us, how do we make it happen? And I know there are some newer, more unique ways that people are looking at funding. Can you give us a bit of a high-level review of what you see coming?
Wow, I could go on for a long time. Let me think about how to answer that. The traditional way of funding this infrastructure, if you're a locality, is by bonding and then paying back those bonds with interest, the way you fund any other infrastructure project, and ideally looking to the project to self-finance and pay its own bonds. That's a tested way to fund a public project. I think that the interesting moment we are in at the moment, or the interesting place where we find ourselves, is perhaps a place where there is, in part thanks to Google, new interest among private investors in investing in this kind of infrastructure on a competitive basis. And that's a very exciting dynamic. And so I am hopeful that the kinds of shared risk models, of which I gave you a few examples a little bit earlier, are models for new innovations that we might see happening in negotiations between localities and private companies. But there is no easy source of funding for this infrastructure. When I talked about the brutal economics of fiber to the home, it is really hard to make happen. It's very capital intensive, and revenues can be very modest. And sometimes there is not a market that will deliver the kinds of revenues necessary. So this is not an easy thing for cities, and in every single case where a city or a town or a county or a village or a parish undertakes a project like this, they are undertaking something profoundly difficult to their credit. I think they understand that. I think they go through an enormous amount of studying and public process before they do so, but it's not a simple matter. And for those of us who keep telling cities, you should, you must do this, go do it, please step back and don't do that. It's asking an enormous amount, and I think it's, for a city that wants to do this, we should give them all the support we can, but I think from outside we should not be telling them what they should do, because it's a very heavy lift, and that decision needs to be made by that community, not by the rest of us.
Thank you. Definitely a reality check for our cities. So I'm going to ask if there are any questions. I'll play Philomena Donahue.
You want to run around?
Sure.
Okay, get some exercise.
Hi, Mike Wiseman, and I have a quick question for Jim and Joanne, and maybe others would chime in. Cable companies are one of the most subsidized industrial sectors in America. Every aspect of the cable business is subsidized by the taxpayers. Have there been thoughts or discussions about changing the subsidy structure for the cable industry so that the taxpayer, so that cities can actually be making money when they grant franchises? And things I'm talking about are, at least in my state, instead of street openings and telephone pole attachments being charged at cost, they would be charged at market rates, for example.
You know, is this on? Can you hear me? I'd have to think about that and whether I would want to take that on as my battle. I ideally would like to see structures in place that don't subsidize, but that are enticing to competitive providers, so that competitors are interested in coming into markets, and that competition creates certain kinds of constraints on certain kinds of practices and brings down pricing and improves innovation and service delivery and customer service and all that. That's really what I'd like to see. On the subsidy side, I would just say that I feel pretty strongly that when Washington creates a broadband or a communication subsidy, like the Connect America Fund or any other kind of program of that sort, I think there should be competition in those kinds of programs so that localities and nonprofits and research and education networks and competitive providers can all compete for that subsidy money. And in the past, the model has frequently been that it's a monopoly subsidy going to the monopolists, and we see that shift happening in Washington these days, to the credit of the current FCC in part, and to the credit of the Congress that passed the Recovery Act and created competitive programs. But it's an indirect answer to your question.
And I would add that there are so many different laws that work to the benefit of incumbents. Just being there is an incredible benefit, even without the additional benefits that the legal network provides to them. For example, subsidized pole attachment rates, preferences for access to multiple dwelling units, which can be 25, 30, 35% of a market, the ability to target rates to individual consumers rather than offer the same rates to everyone across the board. And I could go on and on just talking about those things. all of those are things that we need to work on as well.
Thank you.
I just
Oh,
want to
go
say
ahead.
one brief thing on that. We could talk a lot about the different things that I think we can get out of cable franchises and the various laws that I am ignoring as we do that. But one thing that I think we should really be talking about is money out of politics. Like the amount of money that Comcast, Verizon, AT&T have spent both in trying to impact the committees of the FCC on these issues, the local governments, like all of the state-based anti-Muni and franchise laws that have been passed through ALEC and other entities, as well as the amount of money that these companies donate to those politicians, I think is a considerably bigger problem when we take a look at how we're going to be provisioning telecom around the country for the next generation. So I think that's an essential part of this conversation as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to take one right here.
Oh,
So sorry.
sorry, I want to defer to Ann because I've talked a few times.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So, quick question about funding models. So, this is somewhat inspired by some of the fact sheets I've seen on your website, Chris, about the cost savings that municipalities can, really benefit from long term. Social impact bonds. So, counting savings, using those to leverage potential investments. The idea of counting basically savings as a source of revenue. It's not real, tangible money, but is, huge savings potentially for many institutions and the government, the municipal government. What do you guys think about the potential of that in funding these networks?
Can I start with one? Our problem in part is not so much that there aren't monetary benefits. Our problem in part is we don't know how to measure the benefits and account for them in meaningful ways. The value of jobs, the value of employers coming into a community or not leaving a community. We don't have the tools to measure that very well now. But there's hope. One of the goals that Susan Crawford has had in establishing her program at Harvard is to bring attention to those kinds of needs, to pull economists together and get us answers to questions like that so we can have a real discussion about the benefit of infrastructure of this kind to communities and to the residents and businesses in a community.
And Anne, I think there are a couple of different pieces to this as well. When we talk about cost savings, we're frequently talking about the kinds of networks that connect government institutions and what I referred to as the own don't rent model, in which localities have really driven enormous savings and enabled themselves to scale to much, much better services than they could afford in the commercial market by owning their own networks. But those are networks that connect government buildings, schools, libraries, maybe hospitals, and so on. When it comes to the financing for an enterprise that would go to the home or business, that's much more challenging. And you're absolutely right that there are all these other benefits, and they're of immeasurable value, potentially, social benefits and so on, but that I haven't yet seen anyone come up with a way to turn that into a financing stream, and I think it's frankly unlikely, but it's certainly, that's why government cares about broadband. It's not about the financial statements, but at the end of the day, those financial statements are going to be pretty darn important in a pragmatic, concrete, real-world environment as opposed to a utopian one.
I want to say something that Hannah may not agree with, but I know that the rest of us certainly would say, we're not here to run the cable companies out of business. To quote Harold Feld, we want to make them work for their money. And that's what I think motivates us. So it's worth going out on that, I hope.
Well, I'd like to thank our panel for the great, not just for an informative session, but for the great work they do. And let me remind you that a face-to-face meeting like this is not about presenting the complete information. We have the internet for that. Still, the point of a face-to-face meeting is to figure out who we can trust and who we can go to for more information and who we can engage in dialogue with and who we want to learn from and ally with, and who we want to lead and who we want to follow. So to that extent, if I can stay on the stage, I think this panel was a huge success. This session was a huge success. Thank you all very much for being here and for the work you do every day.